I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream today, all about self-deleting messaging apps and encrypted messaging services. The dark side, perhaps, of encryption, Malika?
I'm Malika Bilan, looking out for your live comments in our YouTube chat and on Twitter, as always, at AJStream. Do you use apps like Snapchat or perhaps Signal or Telegram? Share with us how you use them and why they're so important to you, and I'll do my best to bring in as many of those conversations into today's conversation.
So many of us want privacy and security in our communication, and there are several ways to achieve that. Here's one of those ways.
Text messaging is often the fastest, most efficient way for employees to exchange important information. Unfortunately, traditional text messaging is unsecure. At any given time, there are multiple copies of every message floating around, vulnerable to prying eyes. The mobile phone companies keep a record. The sender has one, the receiver has one. You get the idea. This kind of Achilles heel in security costs companies millions each year in losses, regulatory fines, and public embarrassment. Luckily, TigerText has the solution. TigerText is a fully encrypted, easy-to-use solution for safe and secure messaging. Send confidential company data, sensitive personal information, documents, and more, worry-free, with TigerText end-to-end encryption. TigerText accelerates your company's communications by allowing critical information to travel faster and more securely than ever. TigerText can also help you comply with communication security regulations with one of the strictest security platforms available. Worried your text messages last forever? Tiger text messages will self-destruct after a designated period of time. Accidentally sent an erroneous message? Tiger Text can be recalled with the swipe of a finger. Unsure your boss received your latest report? Confirmations tell you when your message has been delivered and read. Best of all, it's a snap to get started.
So what could possibly go wrong with that? Well, that self-deleting messaging app, TigerText, was adopted by at least one police department in the United States, and the police in question in Long Beach, California, may have used it to share sensitive and potentially incriminating information that they would not want to disclose in court. Since the investigation by Al Jazeera was made public, some changes have happened in Long Beach. Al Jazeera's Simon BOAZMAN filed this report for us, explaining the latest.
The Long Beach Police Department announced the suspension of TigerText after an Al Jazeera investigation revealed allegations from former and serving officers that they had been instructed by their superiors to use the app that would automatically delete potentially discoverable evidence.
I was told that TigerText was to be used to have conversations with other officers that wouldn't be discoverable.
We wanted to keep our communications private on certain issues, especially on officer-involved shootings or murder cases.
The police department denies those allegations. The American Civil Liberties Union believes that by deleting the text messages, the Long Beach Police Department may have breached the California records retention and evidence disclosure legislations, potentially putting thousands of court cases at risk. In response to the investigation, the Long Beach Police Department issued a statement saying that the use of the app would be suspended effective immediately, pending further review of whether the use is consistent with the city's record retention policy, and as part of the review of internal communication practices, the city will be reviewing best practices and current case law.
Simon BOAZMAN joins us now on set. He's an investigative reporter for Al Jazeera. We're also joined in San Francisco by Eva Galperin, the Director of Cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And in Los Angeles by MOHAMMAD TAJSAR, National Security Staff Attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union. That's the ACLU of Southern California. Welcome to the stream, everyone. Now, Simon, as we saw in your piece there, your investigation has had immediate fallout and has led to more investigations, which we will get into today, questioning who should use these self-deleting messaging apps. Before we get into it, though, I want to go to Eva for a breakdown of some of the terminology we're going to get into today, clarification on self-deleting text apps and end-to-end encryption. Break it down for us, Eva.
All right. So frequently when people talk about secure messaging apps, they sort of lump everything together. They say this messaging app is great because it's encrypted. And sometimes they mix it up with this whole notion of self-deleting messages. Now, an end-to-end encrypted message, as we saw in the animation earlier, is a message that cannot be read by the company whose app you're using or the ISP. It can only be read by the sender or the receiver of the message. Now, self-deleting messages are different, and they're not necessarily encrypted, though apparently with TAJSAR they were both self-deleting and encrypted messages. And a self-deleting message just disappears from your phone. This doesn't necessarily mean that it has disappeared from the servers being run by the company whose app you're using or the ISP. It doesn't even necessarily mean that it's being deleted from the phone of the person that you are sending your message to. And it certainly doesn't mean that it can't be screenshot or saved in some other way. But it does protect against certain types of record retention policies, which is what the police are particularly concerned about.
Okay, I'll be asking you questions later, audience, on Eva's description. Thank you, Eva. Really appreciate that. So, back to this police department, Simon. How did you stumble upon the story that they were using an app that meant that at some point the messages on it would totally disappear?
We were looking at a completely different story. We were looking at the high number of officer-involved shootings in America by police forces on young black men and looking at that. And there was a report back in 2015 called Mapping Gun Violence that had Long Beach very close to the top of that list of police departments that had per capita the largest number of officer-involved shootings. Now, Long Beach is interesting because it's not a particularly violent place. It's not a particularly area of high poverty. So we started talking to officers there and in other police forces around the world. Around the US, and very quickly when we're speaking to serving officers and former serving officers at Long Beach, they pointed out there was this app being used between the departments that are involved in officer-involved shootings, primarily the Homicide Department and the Internal Affairs Department. And they pointed out this app was being used where any information between those two departments would just vanish. And that could be pivotal to any family who wants to find out whether their loved one was killed by the police illegally or correctly. And so we started to look into that, and that's where the story kind of grew from.
And some of the quotes in that report that you did the update from are extremely incriminating. We deliberately use this so that other people couldn't track that we were using this.
Yeah, I mean,
and feel comfortable about saying that.
Two officers we spoke to, former and serving, said that when they were given the app, their superiors told them to use this app for information that they wouldn't want to be discoverable.
Wow.
So that was why, for us, that was a stunning piece of information. And from there, we unraveled the rest of the use and how many people were involved and how widespread it had become within Long Beach Police Department.
Simon, so I want to share a comment we got from a resident of Long Beach who is not surprised at what your investigation revealed. This is Dawn Montkin. She's the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, the Long Beach chapter. And this is what she told the stream.
We are not surprised the Long Beach Police Department is hiding and deleting evidence. Long Beach PD has a notorious history of abuse, brutality, militarization, profiling of Black and Brown communities, predictive policing, and murder. Of 1,152 people killed by police in the U.S. in 2015, Long Beach police were the 5th most murderous. Billions of residents' tax dollars have been spent covering up their systemic abuse. All of those cases need to be reopened. Investigation of their Tiger text use to discard evidence is merely affirmation for why we want our tax dollars better spent in Long Beach.
So, Mohammed, while Dawn may not have been surprised, some of our community members are. This is one person who tweeted in, wait, why are police departments using self-deleting apps? Isn't that a violation of the Freedom of Information Act? And as public servants, aren't they required to preserve any and all communications? Mohammed?
That's exactly right. I think our principal problem at the ACLU with what the city of Long Beach was doing was that the use of these applications violates basic records preservation rules that ensure that the public has access to important records and information about how the governments function. And these rules exist across the United States and are designed to provide a basic accountability mechanism for what the government is doing. Now, in this case, if the government uses these applications to immediately destroy these very same records, it prevents the public from having access to what could potentially be incredibly important information. And in this case, information that touches on the lives of so many people and has and concerns the real foundational issue that's been the subject of a lot of debate and controversy in the United States, and that is the issue of rampant police killings. And so we at the ACLU are incredibly concerned about the use of this technology, both by the city of Long Beach, but also by governments across the country.
Simon, a couple of bits of evidence here. If anybody's doubting that this actually took place, in your report you have an update email, and it says TAJSAR secure messaging app, and it says please feel free to resume communicating via the TAJSAR app. So let's go onto the secret channel. No one can follow. And then another one, which is basically it's really simple. It's a purchase order, but the purchase order, it's for a certain price. It's for up to $25,000, and then it actually just details here the TAJSAR subscription license period from 2016 to 2017. Is there anything wrong with the police department having this kind of app?
Yes, I mean, I think if we split the thing in two, if they had end-to-end encryption messaging apps, and then they retained all records for the set period of time under California law, and then handed them over during court cases as requested at the discovery phase, and with all compliance legislation, you could argue that using a system like this would be absolutely fine. But they chose a system which deletes the messages forever. It can now no longer go back and get those messages and produce them in court or produce them in any kind of documental phase to say we have done nothing wrong. You know, the Long Beach Police Department said to us when we first told them we comply with all legislation on this, we don't break any laws. 2 days later they suspended all use, and now they're doing a review of whether they're complying with all the laws they told us they were complying with.
It's the 2 days later after your reporting that is the red flag that they knew that they weren't doing the right thing.
They had TAJSAR at least since 2014 up until 2018. That's hundreds and hundreds of cases that this app was being used to communicate evidence around this. 150 odd officers within Long Beach Police Department had it. Out of the 290 phones issued to staff in Long Beach, over half of them had the app to communicate with each other. You will never know what they were talking about to each other. The city's attorney, the person who's legally responsible to ensure that the police are complying with all legislation, didn't even know they had it. He didn't know they had it until we told them that they had it. The district attorney for the County of Los Angeles has just launched an inquiry through this, and the same body that's doing the inquiry into Long Beach Police Department is the same inquiry group that investigate whether police killings are legal. It's the Judiciary and Oversight Committee. So these are now serious allegations against Long Beach Police Department, whether they comply with their own legislation, whether they withheld evidence from any court cases. And Mohammed will tell you now, better than some, I think it's going to be a very brave law that opens up hundreds and hundreds of prosecutions in Long Beach again, because we don't know what these police officers were talking about.
You know, Simon, at the risk of echoing you here, we have a tweet here, and it really shows just the gravity of this. This is James, a reporter at the Los Angeles Times. He says, less than 12 hours after the Al Jazeera report detailing its use of a self-deleting messaging app that could cause record retention discovery issues, the city of Long Beach has suspended the use of TAJSAR. Long Beach police had been using it since 2014. So really just echoing what you said there. But Eva, I want to bring you in here on this because secure communication seemingly is a good thing. What's your take on this?
Well, privacy and security are two different things, and both private and secure communications are good. But ordinary citizens have different freedoms and obligations than the police department. The police department is made up of police. These people are public servants. They have obligations to maintain records of the things that they are doing in their investigations in ways that ordinary citizens do not. And it looks like they were using TAJSAR specifically for the purpose of circumventing those obligations, which is really disturbing.
So if we're looking at who should be using these apps and who should not be using these apps, Mohammed?
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting here is that is that what we need to do is be able to sort of think a little bit strategically and a little bit sort of in a nuanced fashion about the technologies that are available to members of the public, to the corporate sector, the private sector, as well as to governments. And so what's important is to recognize, as Ava was saying, that there are different obligations and different requirements that we all share in these different spaces. And so as members of the public, or as a lone individual, I have an interest in making sure that my communications with my spouse, with my family members, with my friends are private, and that individuals, whether hackers, government agents, or other sort of intruders, don't have access to that information. But I don't have that same obligation for the local police department who patrols my streets, or for the housing authorities that I apply to get public housing from, or from the tax man for whom I provide all kinds of sensitive information. I want to make sure that their communications are recorded and are kept in a secure fashion so that they do not leak, they are not compromised in any fashion. So I think we really have to be able to understand how technology operates in this sort of multifaceted existence that we all live in.
So Tiger,
what's particularly interesting
Go ahead, Eva.
is that governments and law enforcement, including the FBI and police departments all over the U.S., have insisted that they should be able to backdoor these apps because they're being used by criminals, and so they're perfectly fine with using these apps to circumvent their own obligations, but they're not into the idea that they might be used by the people that they're trying to keep an eye on or that they're trying to catch.
One of the things that we talked about when we were in Long Beach was the amusing scenario now. We always talk about the arms racing technology of criminals and the law enforcement staying one step ahead of each other. So if the criminal's using something, the law enforcement has to catch up. What we may be entering in is to a new era in which the government are trying to stay ahead of people like myself, activists like Mohammed, saying, what are you doing? And they're trying to stay ahead of our ability to keep an eye on their communications now, which I think is going to be an interesting challenge for the 21st century.
I'm trying to think.
And what you really don't want is a dynamic in which the people in power, the people who have guns, the people who have the power to imprison you, have privacy and security, and the ordinary people who might be activists or journalists or trying to hold them to account don't. That is, in fact, the opposite of civil liberties.
Mohammed, does this make us in a very mushy area where the criminals and the police are using the same technology and the public is using the same technology and they're all trying to keep secrets from each other?
Yes and no. I mean, I guess I'd say that secrecy by itself is not bad, right? So secrecy, deletion, sort of privacy, these are not bad concepts. These are all really good depending on the context of how they come up. So I'll give you one example. So the government engages in a whole host of different surveillance and investigatory operations to keep tabs on members of the public, even when members of the public aren't suspected of committing a crime. So for instance, if you drive in an intersection, there might be a camera that tracks what cars drive past that intersection. That camera collects all manner of different sort of data about you and about members of the public. Would we want that data, for instance, kept in an insecure fashion that might leak in a way that would result in our movements and our sort of public, private information disclosed to members of the public? Certainly not. And indeed, what I would suggest is that information about members of the public collected through surveillance technologies must itself be deleted if the government does not suspect you of a crime. So in that context, I'm for the deletion of government records. However, I'm against the deletion of government records when it violates laws that are designed to interrogate how government itself functions, right? So you can imagine between those two poles a sort of nuanced debate about when these records should be kept and when they should be deleted. On the one hand, records about how government works, and on the other hand, records about you and I and everything that we do that happens to be scooped up by the government.
And I think the punishments are completely unequal, because if the police department released my social security number or some piece of my personal information, I can take action against that for a breach of my personal data.
Sure. When
Long Beach Police Department potentially break legislations on records retention, it's it's almost like nothing is going to happen to them. Nothing legally will happen to them for that undertaking. Someone might lose their job, you never know, but nothing legally will happen to Long Beach Police Department now.
So I like the point about being able to take action if your information is leaked when it shouldn't be. Here's someone whose glass is perhaps half empty. They say there can always be a reason for breaching your privacy, be it a hacker looking for data to sell or a government body because your name resembles a terrorist. At the end, I don't think anyone has the privilege of privacy, which is sad. So in keeping that in mind, I want to take a look at this, Eva, because this is what Afroz tweeted us in. He's not the only one who's talking about this idea of a back door. He says, when fake messages are the reason for riots and lynching, especially in India, referencing WhatsApp chains that are not fact-checked and are then spread. Afroz says backdoor access should be given. There are no other way to stop this agenda, but ordinary people should not be harassed or their messages should not be exposed. So take us through the idea of a back door. Who should have access to that door, the company or the government?
Well, I think that one of the biggest problems with the demand for a backdoor is that when you have end-to-end encrypted messaging, backdoor suddenly makes your end-to-end encrypted messaging no longer end-to-end encrypted. It's no longer as secure as it was before, and there's no way to guarantee that only the sender and the receiver are able to get the message. We have had a number of very high-profile leaks of government data and of data from apps, showing that if you build a backdoor, it's not only going to be used by governments or law enforcement or whatever you think of as the good guys. It will inevitably be used by criminals, by governments that you don't approve of. It will be used by jealous boyfriends stalking their exes. There will be all kinds of very serious abuse, and that is why any kind of backdoor is simply unacceptable, because it destroys the entire premise of end-to-end encryption.
Mohammed, I'm just wondering, should there be a front door then? The front door is the law. You cannot use this if you're a public official.
Well, certainly what you cannot do is you cannot devise and mandate backdoors into otherwise secure communications. We know that so the intelligence agencies in the United States and in the UK have tried to weaken encryption protocols. And this is a really dangerous a push, because not only for the reasons that Eva was talking about, but also because the ends here are in pursuit of an agenda to tackle a problem that on its face is incredibly rare. So if the concerns are about terrorism, for instance, that concern, the rates of terrorism are incredibly minuscule, the incidents of terrorism are incredibly rare in the Western world. And yet the threat from weakening encryption has the natural consequence of impacting literally all walks of life that we engage in, whether it's communications with each other, whether it's communications with lenders, banks, whether it's data that's controlled by members by the government, or in all forms of digital life. Encryption is literally the backbone of how the digital age works. And so threatening that in pursuit of a, frankly, negligible chance of an attack, I think is a dangerous premise and something that we should not accept.
All right. Simon, in the final seconds of our program, lessons learned from your reporting and the instant reaction that you got.
Lessons learned: everyone should FOIA their local police force and find out if they're using self-deleting text messaging
Information
systems.
Act is what a FOIA is.
Go and ask them. And, in result of what we've done, they've stopped using it. The local community now are incredibly aware of it, and people like Mohammed is keeping on top of them to make sure that they don't slip it back into how they operate.
Thank you so much to Eva, to Simon, to Mohammed. Malika, where do you want to leave us?
Interesting conversation. I will leave us with this tweet from Bando, who says, I use WhatsApp into encryption there. I live in the States. I've converted more than a few American friends to use it. I love using it to communicate with friends overseas as well. I believe we are entitled to our privacy, and governments cannot be allowed to take that away.
This will not be the last time we have this conversation, but for now, we're wrapping it up. Malika and I will see you online always at Twitter @AJStream. Until the next time, thanks for watching.